Hello. Great to be here. I've been looking forward to it. Let me congratulate Amber and everybody else who have anything to do with getting all you in the room today. I can feel the energy. I'm excited by the energy. I can remember when we were first debating the wording of the principles. And now it's nice to come around the country and actually see them on napkins and shirts and, and all these other things. Yeah. Speaking of Dr. Ferguson, when I was a little kid, my grandmother went to a white-collar church, and we went to a blue-collar church. And in her church, there were a bunch of people you had to call doctor. And I resented it, because it seemed there was some social distance there. So I said, when I grow up, I'm going to get me one of those, but I'm not going to ask anybody to call me that. So we're here today because it matters. I grew up in a family of 5 boys. There were 4 grown-ups that raised us: my mother, my father, my mother's mother, and her father. Each of the 5 of us had a different relationship to that combination of 4 grown-ups. And I could tell each of the life stories depending upon what the bond was with each of those 4 grown-ups in our house when we were little kids. Turns out I was the closest to my grandmother. She was my inspiration. And so I was Nana's boy. Partly because my mother had some health issues and I was little, so my grandmother took me a lot. And my mother had my younger brother, was just younger than I was the oldest. But anyway, I've learned through my own life story that relationships matter a lot, and it starts from birth or even prenatal. And so we want to talk about why that's so important, what the basics principles are. I think if there's one thing that comes out of today that I want to ask you to do is to memorize the basics principles. And we'll go through that. Adults think they know everything already, right? And they tend to say, oh yeah, I got the basic idea. But you'll find out each of the basic principles has 2 or 3, 4 words in it. They're not just one word, okay? And each of those words is there for a reason. And if you want to be fluid and confident as you talk to folks and encourage organizations to come on board and encourage parents to integrate the basics principles into their lives, actually having it in your head helps. Remember once I spent a whole period teaching a framework to my class. I taught it for 41 years at Harvard. I just retired last spring. But I spent the whole, and you see I'm not really retired. I was already doing this almost full time. So I spent a whole class teaching my class a framework, and then we had a case the next period, and I came back and said, okay, now let's use that framework to analyze this case. And the room was silent. And then one of the students said, you didn't tell us we had to memorize the framework. You can't reason with ideas that aren't in your head. Okay, you can't communicate ideas that you haven't digested. And so I'm encouraging you, if you really want to be a part of this, commit those 5 principles to memory so that you can share and enthusiastically and confidently encourage other folks to be part of the basics movement in Elgin. This picture, I would say for a minute, we work with a class at Massachusetts College of Art, and each year each person in the class has to produce 5 images that relate to the basics principles, 1 for each principle. This one student put all of them in 1 image, but it turns out to be really convenient because it's a great picture. This map shows all the different places we're in right now. We've got footprints in about 117 cities and 4 or 5 countries at this point. Illinois has a number of communities, thanks to the great work done by the folks in DeKalb, who've kind of been Johnny Appleseed around the state with this. And McCormick Foundation for helping to support the work here. And it's about collective intentionality. We want parents to be intentional. We want to be collectively intentional. And one of our taglines is what none of us can do alone, all of us can do together. And you just see this room here, how everybody's effort is being leveraged by other people's efforts, and it's the accumulation of all that energy that gets the work done. And I'd like to say we are helping to create multi-generational family stories. multi-generational family stories. So it's not just that one little 2-year-old. It's his kids and their kids and their kids and their kids and all the people that they affect over time. And I thought I would just put an image up of my own story, my own family over the last 150 years. That girl there is my grandmother. That's Nana. That's her mother and her mother. Nana's grandmother was born more than 150 years ago. Okay. I knew Nana's mother. That was little mother. She lived to be 101. Nana lived to be 100. Okay. But the things that this woman said, who was born more than 150 years ago, may be part of the reason I'm standing here today. Multi-generational stories. Then this is me and my mother, 1952. The mayor's 77, I'm 75. Okay. That's we were sitting sitting on the roof of the car there. Then this is 1988, Nana, my wife, my son, and me. And this is 2021, me and my granddaughter. So what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations with influence being handed down across those generations. And obviously there were people before her, back further and further and further in time. So the work we're doing has impacts that we will never know. I mean, there are things, these people in this picture never anticipated me standing on this stage. But the things that they did led to me standing on this stage. My grandmother was nurtured at, what's the name? I'm blanking on it now. The like Hill House in Chicago, Phyllis Wheatley in Cleveland, Ohio, as a teenager. And she would tell me stories about things that she experienced at Phyllis Wheatley and how that affected her life philosophy and the kinds of things that she passed on. Okay, so you in the institutions where you work, school systems, all kinds of other institutions are affecting children the way my grandmother was affected by Phyllis Wheatley. Okay, and so take it seriously. It really matters. It's easy sometimes to sit back and think, we're not that important in the grand scheme of things. I said sometimes to the basics, I'm by myself, I say, are we redundant? Should I just hang it up and go find something else to do? There are all kinds of other people working in early childhood. And then I come to events like this. I say, well, maybe we do have a role to play. So I'm going to go through and talk about a number of things related to the basics in here, starting from birth. All 5 basics, every child, every day, starting at birth. Okay. It's another thing that it's sort of becoming a tagline. All 5 basics, every child, every day, starting at birth. I'm going to say a little bit about the basics imperative, some of the facts I think that compel me to do this, what the basics principles are, of course, how the community comes together around it, what we call the 3 gears of behavioral change, and the text messaging program. And so I'll do that now, and then I'll talk a little bit more about implementation stuff after the break. All right. Anybody know what those 30%, 70%, 80%, 90%? You mind in the room tell me what those percentages are? I think there are a few people who know. You want to raise your hand and tell me what they are?
Come on, the cow.
That's all right. When babies are born, their brains are 30% of adult size. They're 30% of the size of an adult. A year later, by the time they're 1 year old, they're 70% of adult size. By 3 years old, it's 80%. By 5 years old, it's 90% of adult size. There's a ton of brain development. And as the brains are developing, it's not just the size that's changing, it's the complexity, the architecture of the brain. And the architecture of the brain is sensitive to lived experiences. The pathways in the brain that get used strengthen, just like exercising a muscle gets stronger. The pathways that don't get used get pruned away like a bush where the weak branches, you sort of clip them off so they don't take extra energy, and the energy can be used for other parts of the brain. So as children get over their diagrams we sometimes use that show that the brain of a 2-year-old is denser than the brain of a grown-up, partly because the grown-up's brain has been pruned. And it's mainly those pathways that get used a lot that have gotten stronger and denser. The ones that don't get used that much have gotten thinner and sometimes have withered away. How much of that brain potential and which of those pathways are retained and strengthened depends upon lived experience. And it's the kinds of lived experiences that come from making the basics everyday routines in homes. This diagram is a diagram of skills at the age of 9 to 12 months. Explores objects, explores purposefully, jabbers expressively. Those are things that you can measure at that point in time. Each of those stripes represents children whose parents have a certain level of education. So we go from graduate education to bachelor's degrees to some college, high school completion, and less than high school. And generally you look at this, I mean, there's not that much difference at 9 to 12 months old in these things. The most difference we see over on jabbers expressively. Children whose parents have not finished high school don't jabber as much. And you can speculate maybe there's not as much talk in the household for them to imitate. By the time they're 2 years old, it looks like that. All the differences that we see when they get to school are already there at 2 years old. In terms of the skill differences that are associated with family background. If we cut it by race, ethnicity, you also see the gap, the differences are there at 2 years old. And we have a lot of research that indicates this is substantially the effect of lived experience. Okay, we just don't know down to the 5th decimal point exactly what's generating it, but there's enough research that shows that variation in lived experiences, variation in home conditions do predict differences in kids' achievement and skill and so on and so forth. So this type of diagram by parents' education, by race, ethnicity, is what grabbed me around 2008, 2009 when I first saw these numbers. At the time, I was the faculty director of the Achievement Gap Initiative at Harvard. And I said, we got to do something about that. I put together a national conference that was about research to practice on parenting issues. It wasn't restricted to early childhood. But then after that conference, I put together a national advisory committee that helped to boil the research down to what are now the basic principles. Took about 3 years to get a funder who would touch it. Nobody ever said it was a bad idea. It was just like stood back with their arms crossed. They're like, let's see if you can pull that off. Okay. Finally, we started to get some support. We got it started in Boston, and immediately when it got started in Boston, it started spreading. We kicked off in September 2016. By December, we had 11 other cities there that in a day-long meeting at the Children's Museum. And then it's kept going from there. But this diagram is my inspiration. We can do something about that, and it's got intergenerational impacts if we do or not. The kindergarten patterns flash forward to 5th grade. So 2-year-old predicts kindergarten, kindergarten predicts 5th grade predicts 12th grade, 12th grade predicts 75 years old. You know, and it's all connected over time. This is from a study that Brookings Institute put out that showed if kids were not prepared for kindergarten, they were about 45% likely to be on track at 5th grade. If they were well prepared for kindergarten, they were 82% likely to be on track at 5th grade, almost twice as likely. Okay. One of the most interesting things from some of the research on this in this field is that we call executive function skills, self-management skills, in kindergarten predict test scores in 5th grade. And as we'll talk about in a minute, the basics predicts self-management skills too. The first of the basics principles. We'll come around to that. So it's not simply the cognitive skills, it's also the social emotional that we talk about. It's not simply, does your kid know his alphabet and numbers? In fact, there's research showing that kids can catch up pretty quickly at kindergarten, because if they don't know their alphabets but everything else is fine, 6 months later they'll know their alphabet. They don't know how to count, you can teach them to count. But it's not so easy to teach them to have a conversation with a grown-up that quickly, or to have the self-control to sit still and pay attention and make a plan and follow through with it. It's harder to teach that if they don't already have a lot of that foundation when they get to kindergarten. So some of the stuff we're talking about today helps to lay those more difficult to establish foundations in the first several years of life. So the basics principles. The first principle is maximize love, manage stress, and deals with emotional security, self-regulation. That connection to self-regulation is one that most of us would never have had any opportunity to know exists. Okay, I had no idea that the level of emotional security that little kids feel affects whether they can pay attention in kindergarten and shift attention from one thing to another and make a plan and follow through with it and resist temptation and all those things that involve self-management, basically, self-control. And it's not just about the child's, well, when we talk about the managed stress piece, it's not only about the child's stress, it's also about the parent's stress. Because a parent who does not manage their stress well is not really there for the child. And so teaching parents to take good care of themselves and have ways of coping. A long time I've had this image, don't let your stress cook your kid. Think of the microwave analogy. Parents just radiating stress and it's cooking their kid. If you ever have a chance, go to YouTube and search on still face. Some of you have just shaken your head. You've seen those still face videos, right? And so, where it's a parent who's kind of ignoring the kid, or at least not paying attention, and the baby gets more and more agitated until the parent turns back in. All right, so this is the foundational principle. In some ways, the other principles are ways of expressing love. But maximize love, manage stress. The first version of this, I told you we kind of iterated through different groups to nail down the principles. The first version of it was maximize love, minimize stress, which is more poetic. But then we focus grouped it with parents. One of the parents said, don't come in here and tell me to minimize stress. He said, maybe I can manage it. Okay. And so we changed the word from maximize to minimize over to manage. It messes up the poetry, but also increases the receptivity. Okay. The second principle is talk, sing, and point for effective communication skills. Okay, and as I said before, each word in these phrases matters. It's not just talk. And the first one was not just love. It was about managing stress in addition. Here it's about singing and pointing. Pointing helps infants start to associate words with objects. I have a 2-year-old grandson. He still points quite a bit. His sister talked right out of the womb. All right. He's just getting started with talking. And so, but he's very good at communicating, and he can point and he can grunt and he can, let you know what he wants. And singing is like parentese. Parentese is that high sing-songy voice that babies and puppies tune into. Right? Oh, look at how cute your fingers are. That high, they just tune in to that. And so with talking, though, we want to talk real talk and not gibberish. And I know it's impossible to avoid talking gibberish and baby talk to a baby. I don't know if it feels good or because they tune in or whatever, but I do it too, or did it. But talking real talk reinforces real language. And it turns out that babies can hear at least 3 months before they're born. So they come out of the womb already having started to encode language. I read this past week, I forget where I came across it, a reference to a new study that was on the brain structures of kids in bilingual households they're wired differently right after birth, okay? And they said they don't know all the implications, and so they're not coming out with prescriptive information. But it's evidence that there's something happening to the brain before birth that's affected by the exposure to human language. Okay, babies know their mother's voice before they're born. They come out already recognizing that mother's voice. There's a study of French and German babies that show they cry in the rhythm of their mother's native language. Four-day-olds cry in the rhythm of their mother's native language. Apparently, one, there's a slight uptick at the end of the whimper, and the other is more of a downtick at the end of the whimper. Okay, so if we talk real talk to babies from the very beginning, it accelerates language acquisition. And learning is cumulative. The new things we learn are connected to the things we already know. And so kids in households where there's a lot of talk and back and forth interaction can get way out ahead pretty quickly. And most of you've heard of serve and return, the back and forth with kids. You want to keep keep it going as long as you can. When the kid turns away, that's fine, just stop it. I've got a video of my granddaughter when she wasn't more than a month and a half old doing serve and return with my son. And little kids talk with their bodies, right? So he would say something in parentese, and she would just kick and move and stop and make sounds, and then she'd stop, and he'd say something again, and then she would do it again, and they went back and forth. I was on a train once going, I think, from North Carolina to Washington, D.C., and there was a parent with an 11-month-old, and I decided I was going to model serve and return. I started interacting with him, and he wouldn't stop. Okay. After a while, I was so sorry I started that. We had to go back and forth. So I modeled it all right. But that matters. And they say every conversational turn is a brain builder. I have a video that I didn't bring today. There's a study, there's MIT PhD dissertation on this topic. And they have these little devices, Lena devices, you can put around kids' heads, and they keep track of how many back and forth conversations are. If you hear the adult's voice and the child's voice within 5 seconds of one another, you think of that as a conversational turn. Well, they did this with 4 to 6-year-olds, and they then did brain scans. They had somebody sitting in the room, the kid was in an MRI, they'd be read to, and there's an area of the brain called Broca's area that lit up more for the kids for whom there had been more conversational turns. So they could detect on brain scans the effects of how much back and forth conversation there'd been in these households. So talk, sing, and point. And singing also teaches kids about rhythm and so on. The third principle is count, group, and compare. And here, if we align these with the standard domains of early childhood development, there's not a standard domain that's just about quantitative stuff. Okay, it's sort of in there, it's woven in. But preparing the parts of children's brains that deal with patterns and with quantities. And so it's not just count. If you play grouping games to the 2-year-old, they'll catch on to the idea that 5 is 5 of something. It's not just the word you say after 4. Okay, so playing grouping games. Comparing, looking for patterns. Explore through movement and play. Parents kind of often think, let them play, it's just wasted time. It's idle time. But there's a saying that play is the work of childhood. Okay. Okay, it's discovery time. It's exploration time. And if a parent engages appropriately, they let the child know that their curiosity is welcomed and that the parent is a learning partner. And then there's also knowing when not to intervene. When a child is just sitting, figuring something out and learning what it feels like to discover, what it feels like to persist and succeed with something that was hard at first. And so parents have to So to be students of their children, study their children, and figure out how to intervene, when to intervene. I have a book that I recommended highly. It's a really good book. It's called The Formula: Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Highly Successful Children. A journalist and I interviewed about 200 people about how they were raised, 200 super successful people, and there was a pattern in it. The first 5 years is we call the early learning partner. It's the basics on steroids. Okay. Then there are other roles after that. Flight engineer, the fixer, the revealer, the philosopher, the model, the negotiator, the GPS navigational voice. And the book weaves in and out of the lives of people, telling the stories and connecting to the social science about why particular aspects of parenting practice help kids to grow up to be, highly successful. And highly successful just means having a sense of purpose and a determination to go after it. Right? So, but the basics is that first chunk, the first 5 years in this. And the learning to learn, a lot of that happens during play. And then finally, read and discuss stories. It's not just read. It's also interact with the story, right? In building comprehension skills, building conversation skills, exposing kids to things that they would never see in their everyday lives and helping them make sense of those things. Animals from other parts of the world, people who don't look like themselves, situations they've never been in, right? So again, I said, if there's anything you remember at the end of this, memorize these things. Okay? Every word matters in these phrases. It's not just love, talk, count, play, and read. You throw out 60% of it if you don't only use those words. And if you've memorized them, then you encourage other people to memorize them. And then I want it to be a checklist before the parent goes to sleep. Just before they go to sleep, they run this through their head and say, did I do all these things today? And if they didn't, they say, I got to do better tomorrow. And if they did, they can give themselves a pat on the back and go to sleep. All right? That notion came from one of the young men in our book, The Formula, said his mother said, when you get ready to go to bed at night, think of whether you've done anything worthwhile during the day, and if you haven't, don't go to bed. And he said he still lives by that rule, and if he hasn't, he'll stay up and read something. Okay. So, anybody seen these pictures before? I don't know, the Goddard School, these pictures are from the Goddard School here in town, where it's already started to put up signage for the basics around town. I don't remember your name. It's Cheryl. She's in the back. She's waving. Okay, there she is. So there are ways around organizations, all around the communities, and all around this room, you also see visuals that are bringing these things to mind.
We're going to give them away.
You're going to give what away?
We're going to give
The visuals that are around the room? Okay. Okay, so what I just said in a different word. Oh, the basics also are not foreign. Okay, most of the things in that in the basics principles is things people have heard about, things they already kind of do sometime. And so the message to parents is stuff you already do, but maybe you didn't know how important it was. And so it's about intentionality, but collective intentionality, individual intentionality. And footnote, for families for whom English is not for whom English is not their first language, sometimes they're afraid to talk to their children because they think it will interfere with the acquisition of English. Okay? We want to let them know that it's human language. So talk to the child in whatever language feels most comfortable for you, and they will make the transition fine. If they're a bilingual household, some people speak one language, others speak another, having each person only speak to the child in one language avoids confusion. Okay, so if you got an English speaker and a Spanish speaker or an English speaker and a whatever other language, you keep it separate and it works just fine. All right, so the bedtime checklist, the notion I just mentioned. Community, we talk about socio-ecological saturation. You want to saturate the parent social ecology with a combination of information, encouragement, and reminders to make the basics everyday practices. Okay, and these are just all the different institutions in most communities that people already interact with. And so you talk about trusted messengers. There are trusted messengers in these organizations that can help to convey the basics. And this is just little examples. And residents can organize to focus on the basics in public housing, and all around this. I won't talk through each one of these, but you can imagine for each one of those kinds of institutions the kinds of activities. It's not hard at all to imagine once you start turning your brain loose on this, the ways to do these things. This is a quote from one of the pediatricians in Boston. She says, as a pediatrician using the basics in clinic, I see the influence of its powerful, simple, and sustainable language every day. The universality of this message, the reinforcements between my office and our local daycares and libraries. I love that it's a way to be saying what we've all been trying to say for years, but now we're using the same language, and the families experience that sense that we're a team in a supportive way we haven't achieved before. So the basic principles are a common language. Now, we're not asking any organization to change their program. So if there's a way in your particular program that you talk about early childhood development, not asking you to change that, just asking you to make the connection. Okay, when we say this, we mean the same thing that the basics language means when it phrases it that way. Okay, so sometimes people, oh no, they're asking me to throw my program out the window. No, double down on your program, but just connect it up, be part of the basics community, of the basics movement citywide. 3 gears: information, reminders, relationships. That's out of behavioral science. You want people to do something differently, you got to give them the information they need, but then they need the relational support and the encouragement, and they need some reminders so they don't forget. Okay, and so finding ways to provide the information, the relational support, encouragement, and the reminders. And then one of the prime ways that we provide the reminders and information is through our Basics Insights text messaging program. 2 messages a week until the child turns 5. They can start as early as the day the week they're born. Okay, and every message is linked to the basic principles. And then a lot of the data that we collect is collected from surveys that we push out through the messages to get the research foundations back from this. The up to 5 years, sign up typically through a frontline provider organization, although more and more, even the frontline providers are trying to do bulk uploads. So rather than give the family a QR code to take away someplace and sign up, just keep a spreadsheet right there, get their permission, just even verbal permission to put their information on the spreadsheet. It's only 5, 7 quick little bits of information. Then we upload the whole thing, and you get less slippage. You don't lose the people who take it, the QR code, and they were planning to sign up, but they never get around to it, right? Aligned with the key frameworks, including Head Start, early outcomes, can accommodate supplemental messaging, and languages right now: English, Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, Arabic, and we're about to start trying to add Haitian Creole, but that will be in audio because Haitian Creole is not well established as a written language. And so they get a link, click on it, and they can hear the language. These are some testimonial statements from parents. I've been love the messages. They've been very helpful, and I've learned so much from them. I recommended these to others as well. It's my second grandchild I use it with, invaluable. This is my favorite. You guys are God-given help. Everything is insightful, meaningful, and clear. Thank you so much for helping a first-time mom go through the rides of child development. Please continue to bless me with your tools and knowledge. Forever grateful. I like that. Please continue to bless me. Yeah. Love it. So helpful. I love the basics. It's informative, gives great ideas, and helps me understand my life, my little one. Because as a parent, you might feel we are doing things wrong since parenting didn't come with a manual. So I look forward to my weekly text to try anything new to me that I've read. So it works as intended. There's a high level of parent satisfaction, the impacts on parenting practices, and impacts on child development. I'll just say a word about. On parenting practice, we measure at baseline. There are 5 items that get at parenting practices. How often do you hug and cuddle your child, talk to your child about feelings, talk to your child about numbers, play with your child, read and look at books together. And they can say several times a day, once a day, a few times a week, about once a week, less than once a week. And we get, on the parenting practices, folks who have high school educations on average, are behind the college graduates at first, but they pretty much catch up by 3.5 months later. And how often they're doing these things, whether they're doing these things every day. And then we have an annual parental assessment of child developmental status, where you ask the parent to answer a bunch of questions about child development. And on that, in the simulated off the coefficients we estimated, simulated from ages 18 months to 4 years, which is about 30 months, we gain about 8.4 months of additional maturation on a combined measure of social, emotional, and cognitive development, which is not trivial. And these are measuring skills that are relevant to kindergarten. So kindergarten readiness kinds of skills. So we're changing parenting practices and we're changing kid outcomes with a high level of satisfaction. And parents believe it makes a difference. We just surveyed kindergarten parents whose kids have aged out, whose kids turned 5, they're in kindergarten now. We asked them if they think it makes a difference. They do. They give these great testimonials. They're still using the basics practices with their kids and adapting them slightly as the kids get older. And so it's all good. We evolved together. The basics is a movement now. Implementation ideas from every community, so we crowdsource ideas. Tools and implementation methods evolve as we learn, and we invite you to both benefit and contribute. If you got ideas, throw them on the pile, right? And an idea that ends up here may end up on the other side of the world. We are already in Australia, Brazil, Bermuda, and Canada. Okay, so an Australian community could use an idea that you come up with if it really is compelling. So I'll end this little portion of the morning with a poem. I mentioned I wanted to try to get parents to make this routine. And you can imagine even this poem being on a card on somebody's bedroom dresser. Let them know every day that I love them. That includes when I'm tired and stressed. Yes, we talk, sing, and point as we go back and forth, having fun with the thoughts we express. We count fingers and toes and put objects in groups. We find lots of things to compare. We explore while we play and discover new things, and we do it almost everywhere. We read stories and books and discuss what we think, and sometimes what the books make us feel. Yes, the basics are things that we do every day as a fun way to make our dreams real. So I will stop with that. Okay.